Hello my friends, this is Mrs. Surratt here with another video for you. This is to help you review for the end of course test coming up in May. Hard to believe it's so soon. And today we're going to be looking at Standard 5, which deals with events and key ideas that brought about the adoption and implementation of the United States Constitution. So we're going to start by going backwards a little bit to the Articles of Confederation. Now, if you remember at the end of the Revolutionary War, we gained our independence from Britain, but then the question is, how do we govern ourselves? And if you remember, we had 13 colonies, fiercely independent. They came together to fight for this war, but they each had their own particular way of doing things, and they were not about to try and fix that or change that for anyone else. So the first government that they came up with was the Articles of Confederation. And this was the original governing document of the new United States of America, which is great. But the thing was, remember what Britain had? Yeah, remember that king? They did not want a king. So they made a very weak central government, and they gave a lot of power to the states and not really much to the national government. So, for example, the government could not make taxes. They could not regulate trade. They had no national army or navy. So basically, they were a ship that had no ability to steer itself. If the two states got into a fight, the Articles of Confederation just sat there and said, guys, stop fighting. There really wasn't much they can do. They had a Congress. It was one house. Everybody set representatives if they felt like it. If not, well, they didn't have to worry about it because the states were pretty much in control of themselves. But this wasn't working, and there was actually a rebellion, Shays Rebellion, where farmers, led by a man named Daniel Shays, attacked the national government. They were pretty upset because they were soldiers, they'd been in the war, they didn't really get paid, and then they were about to lose their farms because they can't pay for them. So they rebelled against the government, and the national government was pretty frightened that this rebellion was never going to stop, that it was just going to spread endlessly. And what could the Articles of Confederation do about it? Absolutely nothing. So they realized that they were going to have to revise these articles, and it wasn't able to revise it. Frankly, they figured out we're just going to have to scrap this and start over. But of course, when they created the Constitution, they had to take into account a lot of different ideas and situations. And so when they created the Constitution, it's not like they put it out and everybody said, okay, yay, thank you so much, we'll take it. They actually had two groups, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And the Federalists were led by John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison. These were the guys who wanted to ratify the Constitution. The Federalists believed that a strong central government was key to making a strong country. And so to them, the Constitution was perfect because it had the three parts, the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And these branches could work together, but they would have a strong central leader. They wrote the Federalist Papers trying to convince people, yeah, we need to ratify this. This is good, awesome. But of course, there's also the Anti-Federalists. And the thing I'll tell you about the Federalists is these are people who generally had some education. They were businessmen. They were kind of wealthier people. The Anti-Federalists were sort of your everyday common man. They were led by Thomas Jefferson, and they did not like the Constitution the way it was. They said the Constitution doesn't give any protection to the state governments. So we need stronger state governments, and we also need more emphasis on our rights. Didn't we fight this whole battle to get our independence, to have our rights? And the Constitution doesn't even talk about them. And they were really afraid that a strong central government was going to bring about a king. So there was a compromise created, and the compromise was, the Federalists said, look, if you ratify the Constitution the way it is and let us start this government, as soon as the Congress gets started and the executive, we'll turn around and create 10 amendments. These 10 amendments will be our Bill of Rights, and they will specifically spell out the rights of citizens, like the right to free speech, the right to assemble, the right to bear arms, the right to not have unreasonable searches and seizures, all of those lovely rights. So the Constitution was ratified in 1789, and of course they promptly turned around and they made the Bill of Rights. Let me go to my next one here. Now, the thing about the Constitution is it's not just one person. In fact, this is a limited government. Did you hear that? A limited government. Limits are boundaries or borders, something you can't go past. And this government has those boundaries or borders. So they decided instead of giving power to one person who could do anything they wanted, they would divide it between the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And of course, the legislative branch is Congress, the group who makes the laws. The executive branch is the president who enforces the laws, makes sure they're followed. And the judicial branch interprets the laws. That's the Supreme Court and all the court systems that say what a law actually means. Because sometimes you make a law, but then you have to ask yourself, what does it actually mean? And this idea of separation of powers came from our friend Montesquieu from France. And when they were creating the Constitution, they had some issues they had to deal with. One was the big states versus the small states. Now, I'm not actually talking land mass. I'm actually talking the number of people, the size of the population. New Jersey was pretty small, and they didn't have a lot of people. Virginia was pretty big. They had a ton of people. And New Jersey wanted to make sure that their opinions weren't swallowed up by the larger states. So New Jersey plan, they were trying to decide, do we have two houses in government? It's called bicameral. Do we have one house in Congress? How do we decide how many people come from each state? So the compromise was this: we'll have two houses, okay, and the Senate will have two representatives from every state. So it doesn't matter if you're a big state or a small state, you all get two representatives. The House of Representatives, on the other hand, the number of representatives from each state will be determined by population. That way the bigger states kind of feel like they're getting something for the fact that they have more people. I mean, if they have more people, do they deserve more representation? It was a question. The other thing they decided on was slavery. And slavery was really tricky because the southern states said, well, we should count slaves in our population because technically we really don't have a very big population because we have so many slaves. But the other states who didn't have slaves were saying, well, no, wait a minute, if you're counting slaves, then you should have to be taxed on them too. But then the other states were saying, well, they don't make money themselves, so how do we get taxed? So this was, again, another tricky issue. And the 3/5 compromise said that southern states could count 3/5 of their slave population when counting population, but they also had to pay taxes on those 3/5. So they only counted 60%, but they still had to pay taxes on them. Okay, so here's your Bill of Rights, which was added to the Constitution to make the Anti-Federalists happy, the specific Declaration of Rights. And this is a pretty good, pretty specific layout of them. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will mention the 9th and the 10th Amendments because those are tricky. The 9th Amendment says that if there is a right that's not mentioned in the Constitution and it doesn't go to the state governments, then it goes to the people. It's basically like a catch-all. Look, if we forgot a right here, like for example, the right to education, it's not listed, but we all say we have a right to education. Well, because that wasn't mentioned in the Constitution and it doesn't belong to the states, it also goes to the people. Okay, and then the 10th Amendment kind of goes the other way. If there's a power that we didn't give to the national government in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, then we need to give it to the people or the states. So education is controlled by the states because it's not specifically mentioned in the Constitution, but it is considered a right. All right, there was a big issue during George Washington's presidency, and that was the Whiskey Rebellion. It was a rebellion in Pennsylvania by the farmers who were refusing to pay taxes on whiskey. And the government had to figure out how to face it. So Washington actually sent the military in to stop this rebellion. And it's the first time that the government actually sent troops against its own people. It established the right of the government, but some people were a little concerned. They said, oh, Washington's kind of acting like a king here. Washington also issued the Proclamation of Neutrality that was saying that we need to stay out of foreign conflicts. I mean, guys, we just finished fighting a war. We're just finally getting our country off the ground, and then we need to go ahead and get involved in another war? Washington's like, I don't think so. So we were staying out of the war between Britain and France, and eventually we will kind of get yanked into something like that. But Washington's fear was we were so young as a country, and we weren't very strong yet, that it was a good idea for us to stay out of these fights until we built up some strength. Now, during this time period, during Washington's power, some political parties develop, and the one is called the Federalists. And I want to point this out. This is not the same as the other Federalists. Those Federalists started before the Constitution was ratified. These Federalists start after the Constitution. So I know it's really tricky, Federalist, but you need to look and say to yourself, is this before the Constitution or after? And if it's after, then the Federalists rivals were the Republicans. Easy for me to say. The Federalists were led by Hamilton. They favored a strong central government, and they agreed with Washington's strong reaction to the Whiskey Rebellion. They preferred a loose interpretation of the Constitution, meaning that they looked at the Constitution and said, well, we don't have to go with exactly what's in there. We can kind of use these words to, to kind of stretch a little bit. They were usually the wealthy business owners and the highly educated. Jefferson, on the other hand, leading the Democratic Republicans, they favored stronger state governments. You see, this fight is still going on. Even though they've fixed the Constitution, they're still having some issues here. He thinks that Washington was too strong when he put down the Whiskey Rebellion, and he's saying, okay, this just proves you can't trust a strong central government. And they preferred a more literal interpretation of the Constitution. If the Constitution said you could do it, you could do it. If it didn't, you can't. So, for example, with the Louisiana Purchase, well, the Constitution doesn't say if the government can or cannot purchase land. So when Jefferson became president, he actually kind of had to go against his original opinion, but it was in the good of the country. And then the Democratic Republicans also were mostly farmers and small business owners. Okay, my friends, so that's just an overview of Standard 5. And if you heard anything in this video that you think, boy, I really don't remember that, that gives you a good hint of where you might need to do some studying. I wish you well and good luck.